Hi, everybody. My name is Alan McCabe. I'm with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, the founders of the Wall. And I'm also a longtime volunteer for the National Park Service here at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. This video will cover the history, the symbolism, and the power of what has become one of the most visited memorials in the world. Since the dedication on Veterans Day 1982, nearly 200 million people from all over the world have visited this site. Only the Lincoln Memorial draws more visitors here in Washington. In April of 1979, a Vietnam veteran from Bowie, Maryland named Jan Scruggs, along with several fellow veterans, founded the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Their goal was simple: build a memorial on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., to remember the more than 3 million who had served in Vietnam and the 58,000 who gave everything for their country. Scruggs had served with the Army's 199th Light Infantry Brigade in 1969 through 1970. He was seriously wounded in combat in May of 1969, earning the Purple Heart, as well as 3 Army Commendation Medals during his tour of duty. 2 other members of that early team should also be noted. Vietnam veterans Bob Dubek and Jack Wheeler were instrumental in the project. I view Bob Dubek as the man behind the curtain, the one who got the contracts negotiated, got the permits, ordered the granite, worked with DoD on the name lists, and much, much more. Bob Dubek is still a frequent visitor to the Wall. You'll often see him out on his bicycle on the National Mall. The late Jack Wheeler was able to use his connections and political savvy to arrange key meetings with legislators to get the project started and to stay on the rails. In D.C., having someone who can help you through the maze of politics is critical. Many people would later become involved in the project, but these were the big 3 in my opinion: Scruggs, Dubek, and Wheeler. One of the goals of building a memorial was to help heal the nation. The Vietnam War had lasted 20 years. Now, America had been involved in the region militarily since 1945, helping to drive out the Japanese during World War II, and then supporting the French in their fight to prevent their colony from falling to communism. Though never a declared war, what Americans call the Vietnam War began rather quietly with the introduction of advisors by President Eisenhower to support the new country of South Vietnam on 1 November 1955. And on it went through the heavy fighting in the 1960s and early 70s until the last deaths off the coast of Cambodia on 15 May 1975. It was also America's first televised war. Never before had we seen the terrible images of war in living color on the TV in our living rooms after dinner. And while public support initially was strong for our intervention in South Vietnam to prevent them from becoming a communist country, the rising casualty count and the seemingly never-ending fighting caused many Americans to feel that they had not been told the truth about what was happening in Vietnam or why we were there. Protests over the war and over the draft broke out across the country, particularly on college campuses, culminating in the shootings at Kent State and Jackson State universities in the spring of 1970. And something happened which had not happened before in American history. Some in the country turned their anger over the war toward the very service members we had sent to fight that war. I have talked with thousands and thousands of Vietnam vets over the past 2 decades at the Wall. Every one of them has a different story and a different experience when returning home. And while not every returning soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, or Coast Guard service member was disrespected when they came home, many of them were. There were few welcome home parades. Many vets were ordered out of their military uniforms and told to put on civilian clothes when they returned to the States. This was to help them from being identified as a returning serviceman or woman. Some of my friends have told me that they would not even note on their resume that they were a Vietnam veteran. They were afraid that would prevent them from being hired. But as with many things in Vietnam, that was not true for everyone. How they were treated was different for literally every returning vet. But with the public attitude very often against our veterans, we did see an increase in unemployment, homelessness, alcoholism, drug addiction, and suicides. The country was not in large part prepared to handle not only the combat wounds, but the mental wounds, post-traumatic stress, survivor's guilt, depression, and more. And then the impact of exposure to some of the chemical defoliants which had been used in Vietnam to clear the enemy's hiding places, often simply called Agent Orange. Those began having an impact on the health of many vets. A friend of mine and fellow volunteer told me that when he got home from Vietnam, he took everything he had from his service, his uniform, boots, medals, souvenirs from Vietnam, and put them all in a bag and threw it in the Delaware River. He wanted Vietnam just to be gone. It was a tough time for many vets, to be sure. But I do want to note that many, many Vietnam veterans came home from the war to lead wonderful, productive lives, raising families, running businesses, teaching, working as firefighters, police officers, continuing their careers in the military, leading organizations, volunteering, giving back, helping to make the world a better place. To me, our Vietnam veterans are as great a people as any generation this country has ever sent to war, especially considering what many faced when they came home. So this memorial is to help us all remember the price paid, and I believe that it has changed America. The Vietnam veterans made a commitment that they would never again allow our country to send our men and women into harm's way without the support and respect they deserve. Due to their commitment, today we honor and appreciate the service of our military service members, and our Vietnam veterans are proud to wear a baseball cap or a t-shirt that proclaims Vietnam Vet. They usually are the first to step forward and shake the hand of our new veterans to welcome them home and thank them for their service. So there was this idea for a memorial on the National Mall and the formation of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Then the hard part came. The first challenge was to get government approval. And think of this memorial opened just 7 years after the last deaths in Southeast Asia. It took 6 decades to get a World War II memorial built, over 40 years for a Korean War memorial. But Vietnam had been a raw wound, and I think Congress saw the need to do something as well. Virginia Senator John Warner and Maryland Senator Charles Mathias proposed a bill to approve a Vietnam Veterans Memorial. The Senate approved that legislation 100-0. The House easily passed the bill, and President Jimmy Carter signed the legislation on 1 July 1980, authorizing a Vietnam Veterans Memorial on 2.5 acres of land in what is called Constitution Gardens on the National Mall. From just April of 1979's idea to approved legislation in only 15 months. But now they had two big problems: no design and no money. Well, a decision had been made regarding the money. No public funds would be used to build the memorial. Only private contributions from the American people would be accepted. Think of the symbolism of that. If you were for the war or against the war, your tax dollars would not be used. It would be up to you as a private citizen to voluntarily decide if you wanted to help fund the project. This is a symbolic way of removing controversy involving a controversial war. Nearly $9 million was raised with no appropriation of taxpayer money. As for the design, they had a great idea. Do not hire a specific architect. Instead, sponsor a national competition, open it to all U.S. citizens 18 years of age or older. And think of that, a competition that gives every adult a chance to submit a design. So instead of divisive, it's inclusive. Another step to heal the nation over the war. They appointed a panel of 8 judges for the contest. none of them Vietnam veterans. They wanted to have the most distinguished panel of jurists they could find, architects, sculptors, and city planners who had had a lifetime of achievement and experience. And then another great decision. It would be a blind judging contest. Those submitting entries were not allowed to put their name on the entry, but instead place their information in an envelope taped to the back of the entry, so the judges would not know who had submitted the designs and could not be influenced. First prize would be $20,000. That would be enough to get plenty of folks interested in entering the competition. If you have a competition, you need some rules. There were only four in this national competition. Number one, make no political statements. Number two, maintain the park-like setting of the National Mall. Number three, be a place of contemplation and reflection. And number four, contain the names of every one of our dead and missing. That was it. Simple and open to an incredibly wide variety of ideas. The competition ran from the fall of 1980 until the spring of 1981. In that time, they received 1,421 entries. So many entries, in fact, that they needed to use a hangar at Andrews Air Force Base to set up all the entries for the 8 judges to review. Those judges spent a week going through the entries, eliminating more and more, until they had finally narrowed the field down to one. 8 judges, 1,421 entries, and a unanimous decision. One entry they believed fit all the qualifications and simply and powerfully told the story. It's what we today know as the wall. And when the envelope was opened that was attached to the back of the entry, the address was from New Haven, Connecticut, the home of Yale University, and the name, Maya Lin. A 21-year-old undergraduate student, non-veteran woman whose heritage traced back to China, a country which had supported North Vietnam in the war. But Maya was actually born in Ohio, and her parents were both professors at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. Nonetheless, because of her heritage, age, gender, and lack of military experience, some of the critics screamed, and not just at this young woman who they felt had no right to be designing a Vietnam Veterans Memorial, to the very design she had submitted. A black underground memorial in a city of towering white monuments, memorials, and buildings. Washington, Lincoln, and Jefferson were the only major memorials on the mall at that time, and this one sure was different. But although she was only 21, Maya Lin and VVMF defended her design at several public hearings. They couldn't convince the critics completely. There was a compromise, but eventually the Department of the Interior gave the go-ahead, and the groundbreaking occurred on Friday, 26 March 1982, less than 3 years from the time Jan Scruggs had founded the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Let's talk about Maya Lin's design. Maya was majoring in architecture at Yale and in a class on funerary architecture, how we remember our dead through memorials and monuments. Maya won the national competition, but famously got a B in funerary architecture. Tough professors at Yale. Maya wrote later that she came to this spot on the mall with no real knowledge of the Vietnam War, and she noted that she had intentionally read nothing about the war, so as not to be influenced one way or the other about the war itself. She wanted to have a clear and unbiased mind. She said the only thing she really knew about the war is that it had torn this country apart, and that is critical in the very design of the memorial. Maya would say that when she looked at this land, she envisioned a giant knife cutting America open. If you look at the wall, you can visualize a knife puncturing the earth, cutting deeper and deeper into the skin until it is over 10 feet deep, and then finally pulling the knife back out of America. The wall is a wound, a cut, a scar, as Maya said, a rift in the earth. It is what the loss of those 58,000 did to America. The panels of the wall don't get taller, they get deeper. When you walk into the memorial, you are walking into the wound, as the cost of war grows more and more powerful around you. As you exit the memorial, Maya said it would release you and let you back into the sunlight after you had made your own peace with the dead. In that way, the memorial was intended for the dead and the living as we interact inside the memorial. To give Vietnam its own historical place on the National Mall, Maya pointed the eastern side of the memorial directly at the northeast corner of the Washington Monument. The western side of the memorial points directly at the northeast corner of the Lincoln Memorial. I have always felt that the Vietnam Memorial is cradled between these two great presidents, perhaps reaching out to them. One of our volunteers, the late Sid George, said the wings of the memorial to him were like a mother's arms, welcoming and cradling her sons and daughters. As you walk out of this valley, overwhelmed with the loss, you walk out towards Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. There is something very powerful in that, and it was not missed by Maya Lin. Maya used black granite in a city of mostly white marble. The critics didn't like it. They equated black with defeat or shame. But Maya noted that black is the color of earth. It is the earth itself. The memorial is a cut into the earth is black, and so the memorial must be black. The idea was to simply polish the edges of the earth so the names would become prominent. When you think of granite, you think of a very hard material. And here, granite is the very hard and permanent barrier between the living and the dead. We are on this side, the dead on the other. They can never again enter our world, though we can reach onto the wall to touch their names and remember them. And Maya Lin knew that when black granite is polished, it becomes a mirror, and the wall itself is a mirror. When you stand in front of a name, you are looking at yourself in their reflection. A remembrance that those men and women were just like us. Sons, daughters, best friends, boyfriends, the kid in your church choir, the newspaper delivery boy, or the kid down the road who played on your little league baseball team. They were no different than all of us, but we remember them forever in black granite in Washington, D.C. One of the competition rules required that the names of all of the dead and missing be included. The rules did not state how the names should be listed: by state, by branch of service, by unit, by rank, by color, by religion. Maya Lin chose to list the names in the most powerful way there is, at least in my opinion. They are listed in the order they died or went missing. Think of that. The wall itself is the diary of the Vietnam War, written in the very names themselves. No speeches by politicians, no editorial comments or interpretations. Just the names writing the story of the war. By listing names chronologically, Maya Lin said that every name becomes a moment in American history. It puts those who fought together and died together forever on the memorial. There are no references to rank, race, religion, gender, or branch of service. Generals are next to privates, Jews next to Muslims. Race not an issue. In death, everyone is equal. The price paid the same for everyone. Listing the names chronologically also helps a veteran get back to the very panels for when they served in Vietnam. Many times a Vietnam vet won't remember the actual name of a buddy they lost. Guys generally knew each other by nicknames. But if they know the day, I can find that day on the wall, and his buddy will be there. Many of our Park Service volunteers are Vietnam vets. I can often tell when that volunteer served in Vietnam by where they stand at the wall. They are back with the guys they served with. One question often asked is, why weren't they simply listed alphabetically? Well, the simple answer is that listing the names alphabetically has no significance or symbolism, just like reading a telephone book. And while it might make finding names a bit easier, there are nearly 700 Smiths on the wall, over 500 Johnsons. In fact, there are 38 men with the name of James or Jim Smith. So now we know that the names are listed in chronological order by incident date. But where do they start? Well, it's logical to assume that the wall starts small, grows gradually larger as our involvement in the war grew, and then gradually declines as President Nixon began to downsize the in-country forces in 1969. And it's logical to assume that the names start at the western point, since we read left to right, and because most visitors come in from this side, coming from the Lincoln Memorial. And to some who think the wall is alphabetical, it also seems logical, since the first name on the western side is John Anderson. But the names do not start at either end. Maya Lin knew that the center of the memorial, the apex, and the deepest part of the memorial is the most powerful spot. It's quiet there, blocking out the city noise. You're surrounded by the names in that quiet place. And it is there that Maya Lin starts the names. You'll see a marker for 1959, and that is where the names begin. Army advisors Dale Bice and Chester Ovnand were killed on 8 July 1959. They were in their base camp when enemy guerrilla forces managed to sneak into the camp and began an attack which killed Bice and Ovnand. The Pentagon considered them the earliest Vietnam War deaths when the wall was built in 1982. Since then, however, the earliest date of eligibility for the memorial has been changed to 1955. That's the year that the very first advisors arrived in the new country of South Vietnam. And with that change, 3 additional names were added who died pre-1959. The qualifications to be on the wall: active duty, United States military, serving in the theater of conflict, who died from any cause or were declared missing in action during the dates 1 November 1955 through 15 May 1975. Over the years, the Pentagon has also approved the addition of over 300 names to the wall for a variety of reasons. Some added were airmen shot down while flying combat missions from bases outside of theater. Others died long after the war as a result of direct complications from combat wounds or injuries. The names are added to the memorial as close as possible chronologically to the date of the original incident. You can often see new name additions. They're generally the 6th name on a line and often appear a bit lighter than the originally inscribed names from 1982. Those decisions to add names are solely those of the Department of Defense. The wall starts with this 1959 marker and then reads like a book, top to bottom, in the order of incident date. When you reach the bottom of a panel, you go to the top of the next one, just like reading a book. You'll even notice that the panels of the right side of the memorial, the eastern side, are left column justified, or flush toward the center of the wall, as if it were the center of a book. The names flow panel by panel to the right from the center until you reach panel 70 East, and it ends with Jesse Alba. The wall then appears to enter the earth as it points toward the Washington Monument. Then it rises back up out of the earth, coming from the Lincoln Memorial with the name of John Anderson on 70 West. It then once again reads like a book, working its way back to the center or apex of the memorial, where it finally ends with the name Richard Vandegeer, killed 15 May 1975. You'll notice that the panels on the western side of the memorial, the left side, are right column justified or flush toward the center of the wall. This design brings the first, Dale Bice, together with the last, Richard Vandegeer. The names meet at the symbolic binding of the book. It's full circle, the first and the last together, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. As you walk out of the memorial, you are slowly released, walking back into the sunlight toward Washington or Lincoln. Sometimes it appears that the names are alphabetical. Well, they are on days in which there was more than one casualty.
There was no way to know who died first on a given day when fighting was going on through so much of the country. So within the day, the names are alphabetical by last name. Of course, the days don't always start over with an A, like Adams or Anderson. But if you see a Zimmerman followed by a Baker, Baker would start the new day. Our worst day of the war, 31 January 1968, took the lives of 246 Americans. That day starts with Ghalib Abdullah on panel 35 East and goes all the way to Steven Ziegler on 36 East. That day was so bad, there were 6 men named Smith killed. Then they are alphabetized by first name.
On the memorial, you will also notice that everyone has a symbol by their name. A diamond indicates that they have been declared dead. It does not necessarily mean killed in action. Not everyone was killed in action. Most were, but there were deaths from snake bites, drownings, jeep accidents, a couple of tiger maulings, heart attacks, strokes, and more. Nonetheless, they were serving in the U.S. military in the theater of conflict during the eligible dates, and they earned the right to be on the wall. In nearly 900 cases, an individual on the wall might have a diamond by their name, and the body was not recovered. In this case, they are presumed dead, body not recovered, and would still have a diamond next to their name. You will also notice the plus or cross symbol. That means that they have not been declared dead. Their status is unknown. The symbol can be referred to as a plus or a cross. But according to Maya Lin, the wall's designer, it is not a religious symbol, but rather a symbol of hope. To avoid confusion when talking with visitors, I always refer to it as a plus symbol. When the wall was built, there were 1,256 plus symbols on the wall. Today, that number is down to nearly 700, as our amazing search teams have been able to confirm the status of more than 500 by finding remains or other forensic evidence. Imagine what a relief that has been to the more than 500 families of those found, that at least their loved one's fate is determined. It's not great news, but at least it is an answer. Please note that the plus symbol count on the wall does not match the Pentagon's list of MIA or unaccounted for. The difference is in the definition. In general, with the Pentagon, if remains are not returned, that person is still missing or unaccounted for. When a status unknown is recovered, engravers come to the wall before Memorial Day in the spring and they modify the plus symbols to diamonds. This is also the time any approved name additions are done. On the memorial, the symbols follow the name on the east or right side of the memorial. They have to. Those panels are left column justified. On the left or western panels, which are right column justified, the symbol precedes the name. There was one other symbol for the wall which has never been used. If a status unknown or missing should return alive from Southeast Asia, the stonecutters would engrave a circle around the plus, symbolic of the circle of life. Unfortunately, so far, that symbol has never been used. No missing has ever come home alive.
Many visitors come to the wall to find the name or names of guys they served with, or friends, neighbors, family, or classmates. At first, it may seem to be a daunting task to find a name among 58,000 others, especially since the names are not alphabetical. Well, there are several ways to find a name. The first, ask a volunteer. That's one of the reasons we're there, to assist with finding names and answering questions. We'll be in uniform, usually with a yellow shirt and hat with National Park Service patches. Don't be shy, we want to help. The second way is to use one of the 5 directories that are at the site, 4 at the western end toward the Lincoln Memorial, and 1 at the eastern end toward the Washington Monument. They look like telephone books on raised stands. These directories are alphabetical by last name. And the third way is to use VVMF's online Wall of Faces that you can find on vvmf.org. That's Victor, Mike, Foxtrot.org. There you can not only look up the location on the wall, but almost all of the 58,000 have photographs of them as well. When you locate the name on the Wall of Faces or in the directory, there will be a panel number and a line number. The panels on the side toward Lincoln are the western panels, and they're numbered 2 to 70 west. The ones toward Washington are the eastern panels, and they're numbered 2 to 70 east. As noted earlier, the eastern side of the memorial is the first half of the casualty list. The names on the western side are the second half of the casualty list. Let's say your buddy is located on 6 East, line 70. You'll go to the center of the memorial and then move to the right toward Washington and see the panel numbers at the bottom. The sixth panel to the right of center is 6 East. That's going to put you about May or June of 1966. Line 70 is the 70th line from the top. Don't worry, you don't need to count 70 lines. You'll notice on the edge of all of the even-numbered panels, east and west, are small dots. These dots are every 10 lines. 6E is an even-numbered panel, so look for the dots on the edge of the panel. Count down 7 dots. That's line 70. Your friend will be one of the names on that line, 6 East, 70 lines from the top. The Vietnam War added members to clubs that no one wanted to be in. In 1928, the organization called Gold Star Mothers was formed, mothers who had lost sons or daughters serving in the United States military in World War I. That tradition has continued. The Vietnam War produced 58,000 Gold Star mothers. They have been active in the events at the wall for many years. The war also left thousands of young men and women without a father. An organization called Sons and Daughters in Touch was formed, a group that brings together those who lost a dad in the Vietnam War. One of the things which has been so meaningful to me over the years has been my volunteer work at the wall. There are over 100 current volunteers who give of their time, their knowledge, their compassion to help visitors at the wall. You don't have to be a Vietnam vet to be a volunteer. The National Park Service welcomes all. You just have to have a desire to give something back to the country. You can contact the National Park Service at nps.gov or the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund at vvmf.org to learn more about being a volunteer. Oh, and you don't have to be local. One of the longest serving volunteers lives in Fairbanks, Alaska. Volunteers come from California, Massachusetts, Colorado, Florida, and everywhere in between. Even if you can only volunteer a couple of times a year, it's important. And volunteer teams also wash the wall on weekends from the spring through fall. Many local companies, VFW chapters, social organizations, and more give of their time to keep the memorial looking beautiful. And you can also volunteer to work at the Wall That Heals if it comes to your local community. You can check the VVMF website for the complete calendar of planned visits of the Wall That Heals and see if it's visiting a community near you. Visitors often ask about the many items that have been left at the wall as remembrances. You may leave something at the grave of a loved one, a teddy bear, flowers, a bottle of beer. So too have visitors been leaving remembrances at the wall since it opened in 1982. Somewhere over 400,000 items have been collected and stored by the National Park Service. It's an amazing collection. Dog tags, POW bracelets, helmets, combat boots, love letters, photos of the grandchildren they never got to meet, a red high-heeled shoe, Zippo lighters, bottles of Jack Daniels, Easter baskets, fishing rods, baseball gloves. On Memorial Day 1995, a motorcycle club from Wisconsin left a Harley-Davidson-styled motorcycle at the wall. It was built from scratch with donated parts and donated labor. No one was ever allowed to sit on it. Dog tags were hung from the handlebars for every missing from the state of Wisconsin. The state produced a special vanity license plate for the bike. It just says Hero. The president of the club in a documentary said they left the bike so that any brother on the wall who wanted to go for a ride with the club would have a bike of their own to ride. The collection of items is amazing. A sample of some of these items travels with the wall that heals, the portable three-quarter size replica of the actual wall produced by the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Musician Bruce Springsteen wrote about items left at the memorial in his song, The Wall. On the ground, dog tags and wreaths of flowers, with ribbons red as the blood. Red as the blood you spilled in the Central Highlands mud. Cigarettes and a bottle of beer. Skin on black stone.
I mentioned earlier the controversy of a black underground memorial in Washington, D.C. One of the reasons the construction was permitted to move forward was that a compromise was reached, something which would appease some of the critics of this design. It was decided to add an American flag to the site and to add a more traditional statue as well, something most people would be more accustomed to, and in a sense, something to memorialize all of those who served and came home alive. Local sculptor Frederick Hart was hired. No competition this time. Hart used several local men as his models for the memorial. He never titled it. It's become known as the Three Servicemen statue or the Three Fighting Men. I think it's a powerful addition to the memorial, though reportedly Maya Lin never liked the idea of anything being added to enhance the wall. I do agree that the wall needed nothing else, but I also like this statue. Hart's attention to detail is such that he even shows the veins in their arms. There's an African American, Caucasian, and a third soldier, one Hart said would represent all of the other ethnic groups in this great melting pot of humanity called America. He shows no reference to branch of service or rank, so that any returning vet could identify with at least one of them. They appear young, but they carry the weapons of war. And when you look into their eyes, do you see three young men, weary from patrol in the heat and humidity of Vietnam, stepping from the tree line and stopping in shock, confronted by a black granite wall? Or do you think they're searching the wall to find their own names? The beauty of art is that it is whatever you see in their eyes. Hart didn't tell us what to see. He even shows one of the soldiers with a dog tag laced into one of his boots. That was not uncommon, separating your two dog tags. But one of the features of the statue has always impacted me. From the back, you can see one of the soldiers has his hand on the back of another. Service members who served in combat often have said that the bond they form with the men they are fighting with is more powerful than that of their own brothers. Their lives depend on each other to survive. I think this gesture is so powerful. It says, I have your back. Your color doesn't matter in a combat zone. Many visitors often ask us if there are any women on the wall. The answer to that is yes, but fortunately very few. During the Vietnam War, women were not assigned combat infantry roles. Today, you'll see women in virtually every aspect of military service: infantry, fighter pilots, naval officers, and more. In Vietnam, of the nearly 10,000 military women who served there, most were nurses, about 85%. But because the military women in Vietnam were not infantry, didn't mean their lives were not in danger. There was really no safe place in Vietnam. Enemy shelling of hospitals, helicopter and airplane flights, guerrilla attacks on bases, etc., often put our women in very dangerous spots. There are 8 women on the wall, all 8 of them nurses, 7 Army, and 1 Air Force. But the service and sacrifice of our women who served America in Vietnam is not forgotten at the memorial.
A former United States Army nurse named Diane Carlson Evans, who served in the burn unit with the 36th and 71st Evacuation Hospitals in 1968 and 69, began a quest to build a memorial on the site to recognize the women who served. In 1993, 11 years after the dedication of the wall and 9 years after the addition of the three servicemen statue, Diane's mission was accomplished with the opening of the Vietnam Women's Memorial. Done by a great sculptor named Glenna Goodacre, the memorial depicts three uniformed women and a wounded U.S. soldier. One woman cradles the soldier in her lap as she applies pressure to a chest wound. Another woman looks skyward, perhaps waiting for an incoming helicopter, or perhaps appealing to a higher power. The third woman with her head bowed in sorrow as another soldier struggles to live. Glenna Goodacre would later write that what kept her so focused on the completion of the statue was a belief in her own heart that the soldier does not die, but is saved by those three women. It is a memorial to the living. If any of you ever have an opportunity to visit Michelangelo's famous La Pieta at the Vatican in Rome, I think you'll see a remarkable resemblance between his work and the work of Glenna. And remember that thousands more women also served in Vietnam, though not wearing a military uniform. Some worked as missionaries for USAID, with the State Department or CIA, as civilian medical personnel, with the USO or Army Special Services Organization, and some as journalists. Over 600 women volunteered with the American Red Cross as donut dollies, bringing a touch of home to remote bases and hospitals throughout Vietnam. Remember, these civilians were all volunteers, just as the military women volunteered to serve in the armed forces. 59 civilian women died in Vietnam, in addition to the 8 military women. In the Three Servicemen Plaza is a raised plaque. It's called the In Memory Plaque. It was dedicated 11 November 2004 to remember and honor the thousands of men and women who have died from their service in Vietnam who were not eligible to be included on the wall itself. The deaths from alcoholism, drug addiction, suicides, homelessness, the battles with post-traumatic stress, PTS, and it turns out that the defoliants America used in Vietnam to kill jungle vegetation also has caused cancer and other diseases in many of the men and women who were exposed to it. Their death was caused by their service in Vietnam, and so we remember them. There is even a ceremony here on Father's Day weekend every year to honor the in-memory deaths. More than 6,000 have been honored over the years, and there are probably tens of thousands more who should be honored, but their families simply don't know about this event. That's one of the events at the memorial which VVMF hosts. If you have a loved one or a friend who has died because of their service in Vietnam, I invite you to contact vvmf.org to get that person on the list to be recognized at the In Memory ceremony. As we conclude today, I'd like us all to remember the price that has been paid for our freedom as Americans and for protecting the freedom of others throughout the world. There is no National World War I memorial in Washington, D.C. at this time, but remember that America lost over 116,000 in that war that was supposed to end all wars. We finally got a World War II memorial. It opened in May 2004 and honors the more than 16 million Americans who served and the 405,000 who died or are missing. Inside that memorial is a field of gold stars, each star representing 100 dead or missing. There are 4,048 stars. The inscription reads, "Here we mark the price of freedom." At the Korean Memorial, we honor another 36,000 Americans who helped to keep the people of South Korea free. That memorial opened in 1995. A formation of American servicemen marched through the frozen fields of Korea. The inscription at that memorial says it all: freedom is not free.
And here at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, we mark the price of freedom in the names, over 58,000 of my heroes. And let us not forget that America has lost more than 7,000 of her finest young men and women in service in Iraq and Afghanistan. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. I wish I could take credit for the quote, but it was someone else who once said, "Most walls keep people apart. This wall has brought a nation together." On behalf of myself, Alan McCabe, the National Park Service, the more than 100 fantastic volunteers of the wall, many of them Vietnam veterans, and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, thank you. And I also want to recognize a remarkable young lady at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, Latasha Adams, who took my script and voiceover and produced this entire video. And thank you to Jim Knotts, president of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, for supporting this effort to produce a comprehensive training and informational video. From all of us, we look forward to seeing you in person someday, here at the wall. If you'd ever like more information about the wall itself, make sure to visit the website vvmf.org. Thank you again. I'm Alan McCabe for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Built with private donations by the nonprofit organization Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, or VVMF, the memorial was transferred to the National Park Service in 1984. But VVMF continues to be an active partner with the Park Service. VVMF hosts several annual ceremonies here at the wall, such as a Memorial Day ceremony, Veterans Day, Father's Day, National Vietnam War Veterans Day, Agent Orange Awareness, National POW MIA Recognition Day, and In Memory. VVMF provides most of the maintenance of the memorial, as well as pays for the addition of new names and any status changes on the wall. Through an enormous decade-long effort, VVMF has collected photographs for virtually every name on the memorial. 58,000 names which now have a photo associated with them, which are all online and part of a free application for your smartphone or tablet. VVMF owns the Wall That Heals, a three-quarter size replica of the actual wall itself, which travels to dozens of cities each year. And with the Wall That Heals, VVMF has an amazing walk-through mobile museum in the 53-foot trailer which hauls the portable wall. I invite you to visit vvmf.org to learn more about the many things the organization is doing to help fulfill the promise that the wall was built on, to never forget.